Invincible returned to our app screens this week for its big Season 1 finale entitled Where I Really Come From. I'm Cave Joel, and this is the video series where I give my thoughts and feelings on the episode that was, as well as shouting out any comic book Easter eggs I can find. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the show, shall we? So then, picking up from where last week's jaw-dropping cliffhanger left us, Mark and by extension the rest of the world had finally seen Omni Man for who he truly was after killing a mortal for the second time. In a nice bit of characterization, the ever-trusting Invincible refuses to believe any of this and jumps to the very comic book conclusion that his father must be being controlled by some outside force. But no, this is not a regular comic book story, not by a long shot. And speaking of stories, just as the title led us to believe, this is where Nolan tells his son the true story of Viltrum, the planet that he comes from. What's cool about this scene is that we actually get to see a lot of the same art and animation from the first time Nolan told this story, but now there's extra scenes added showing it to be much bloodier and gorier. And that's because, you see, Viltrumites aren't heroic saviors from the stars, they aren't supermen and women, they're brutal totalitarian conquerors, who after their rabid military expansion of their own space empire stalled out, they decided to send agents to different planets like Earth to weaken them from the inside out for invasion. Now in the comics we actually learned this fact pretty early on around issue 11, but because this is television, the mystery about Omni-Man's true nature and his reason for killing the Guardians of the Globe kinda ended up becoming the mystery backbone of the entire first season of Invincible. And as someone who has read the books and now seen the show, I'm happy to report that this all still hits like a ton of bricks all these years later. Omni-Man tries his best to get his son on his side, saying that the Earth would be much happier under Viltrumite control, and that this was always the plan. In fact, Nolan waited 17 years just to be sure his son didn't end up getting powers of his own. Naturally, Mark is horrified by this revelation and refuses to go along with such madness. He even questions how his father, who he loved and worshipped as a hero, who he saw do so many amazing heroic things on his own, could ever be this cold and callous. The truth is, despite everything he learned on Earth, Nolan was still very much alien in his thinking. Viltrumites live much longer than humans, so for him, 17 years of suburban white picket fence living was just a drop in an ocean. And while he says he certainly loved his wife Debbie in his own way, he also says that really loving her was more like loving a pet. Ouch, ouch, a million times ouch. Those words hurt when I first read them in the comic, and they hurt just as bad hearing them out of the mouth of J.K. Simmons right now. In fact, I'm going to go a step further and say that here in the show it's actually played even more effectively because we've gotten to spend so much time with Debbie as a self-actualized character, where in the book she was kind of a non-entity until after all these horrible events ended up happening to her and her family. Now before I move on, if I may be so bold as to go on a little tangent here for a second, when it comes to the Invincible comic series, I think there are two big moments early on that really solidified the series and its fan base, moments that are really burned into readers' minds even all these years later. The first was seeing Omni Man, the Superman stand-in, the father figure, the mentor, murder that world superhero team. And the second, the thing that this episode is mostly built around, was the unholy beating Invincible received from his own father when he refused to join him in conquering Earth. Most of this episode is dedicated to recreating this scene in graphic detail. But the show also goes several steps further and adds a number of even grimmer actions to the proceedings, taking something that was already shocking and subversive at the time because, well, stuff like this just doesn't happen in superhero comics, and turning the dial up even harder past 11 like that was even possible. Obviously, we've seen father and son spar in past episodes, but this time they aren't holding anything back. Mark goes at his father full force and still barely manages to scratch him. Hell, Cecil tries to help by sending some fighter jets, even though he knows he's basically sending these poor schmucks to their death, if only so the kid can maybe have some time to think. It's made abundantly clear early on just how far out of his depth Invincible is. His father is so strong he ends up destroying most of downtown Chicago just with a single punch. And if that level of familial betrayal and heartache wasn't enough for you, the real salt gets rubbed in Mark's wounds once he realizes all of these regular people around him keep getting hurt and dying, and there's nothing he can do about it even with his amazing power. This is all Omni Man's plan, of course. He's actively trying to beat the humanity out of his son, to send a message to Mark about just how fragile the human race is and how pointless it would be for him, a Viltrumite, to try and defend them from what's coming. By far the sickest new addition to this story is Omni Man literally using his son as a cheese grater to shred an oncoming passenger train. This scene is so bloody, so gory, and so over the top, I can't even show you any of it, less risking getting demonetized by YouTube. It's also a scene I feel some people are probably gonna point to as the scene that crosses the line over into bad taste, but for what it's worth, I think it's a very solid piece of visual storytelling for Omni Man, showcasing his disregard. And again, hitting home just how much impact these superpowered people have, even when they're just standing still. Once again, Invincible is a story that seeks to try and subvert many comic book tropes, and the idea, especially when it comes to the concept of big, citywide, destructive battles, while they may seem cool on the comic book page, in real life they would be a positive nightmare to live through. Another thing I'm very happy to see from the comics here in the episode is the line that will probably end up reverberating through the rest of Invincible as a series, and that is when Omni Man asks his son what he'll have in the next 500 years. When every person he knows or has ever tried to save is long dead and Earth is but dust, Mark heartbreakingly responds saying that, well, he would have his dad after 500 years, in a gut punch that hits just as hard as anything in the fight we had seen beforehand. In the end, Omni Man only ends up staying his hand from finishing off his son when he thinks back to the day he truly became a father and accepted all the good parts of humanity, all the things that he just willingly sacrificed for the sake of Viltrumite duty. Mark manages to survive just barely, but his life will never be the same again. His family has been torn apart, and if that wasn't bad enough, now the pressure of having to fill his famous father's shoes is on his shoulders. After all, with no Omni Man who will defend Earth from the horrors that come next. I should also probably take a moment to talk about the Guardians of the Globe. They had a minor plot line this episode, but a good one at that. You see, after the big fight, even though they ended up sitting most of it out, it was their job to go on in and clean up the rubble and save as many people as they could. It was only really after witnessing so much horror and death did they eventually come together as a true team, and in a nice bit of visual storytelling, they get together and wipe off the last bit of blood from the original Guardians of the Globe, their story officially coming full circle. Now, when Mark and his mom finally do return home, it's a very somber affair. It's clear they barely recognize this place anymore, or their old life for that matter, now that it's been revealed as one giant lie. It's particularly affecting, too, because we get to see several snapshots from old episodes complete with Nolan's dad advice played over them, advice that now takes on a very dark connotation, as we now know what he was saying was always meant to be interpreted in two very different ways. Another very affecting thing the show does is let us see just how much pain Debbie is in as a wife and a partner, and even though he's taken 2 near-death beatings, even though he can fly, Mark still isn't strong enough to console his mother. Instead, he just shuts the door behind him, showcasing that he is still very much a kid with very much still to learn. Now you're probably wondering, how is an episode filled with so much emotional turmoil in the first half possibly continue after all that? And the answer is, it really doesn't. Honestly, if it were me, I would have ended the episode right there with the door a bit, but Invincible just got greenlit for not 1 but 2 more seasons, so we gotta do some last-minute housekeeping. Amber comes back into Mark's life, as do Adam, Eve, and William. He's not sure if he even wants to keep being a hero, yet despite all his concerns when Cecil calls him about another alien invader threat, he takes the case, everyone in his life now being more understanding of his circumstances than they were before. Turns out the invader is Alan the alien, once again voiced by Seth Rogen, the show's very own producer. Mark gets Alan up to speed on everything, and believe it or not, this weird alien man proves to be just the kind of sympathetic ear Invincible needed in his life right now. After all, Alan knows a thing or two about the Viltrumites. They destroy destroyed his home planet and almost drove his race to the edge of extinction. In fact, Alan is part of a big planetary coalition attempting to stop the Viltrumites, and they think Invincible might just be the trump card up their sleeve they need. As the show comes to a close, we're also treated to several other ongoing plot lines, from the Mauler twins going back to jail, to Titan coming to blows with his dragon rival in the underworld, and even the remaining Flaxans looking for revenge on Omni Man as well. But as it stands right now, it seems all Mark wants to do is finish high school, and I mean, who can blame him for that? And so that was Where I Really Come From, and honestly, it was a lot to take in. When I say at times this was emotionally taxing, I mean that as a compliment. Few shows have the power to make you feel and relate to characters on screen, then totally put them through the ringer. But hey, this is Robert Kirkman we're talking about, a man who's made a career out of doing that feat over and over. In terms of adaptation from the comic page to the small screen, I don't think we could have asked for anything better. This truly did feel like the comic come to life in front of me. My only real complaint is that I wish it ended on the clear dramatic high note instead of continuing on for another 15 minutes or so. Overall, I thought this was a banger of a finale, and I know everyone is going to be hungry to see what happens next. In fact, I know people want to know what happens next because Amazon keeps selling out of all the different Invincible trades, meaning people want to try and read ahead now. And I mean, really, if that's not the mark of the next big multimedia series, then I don't know what is. So until next time, everyone, this has been Cape Joel. I hope you enjoyed the videos, and if you did, why not subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you know when I'm back again with more videos like this one. Also, if you have a show or series you'd like to see me cover next, tell me in the comments section down below and I'll give them a look.